The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session on embedding security into digital services and influencing culture. Today we're going to find out from Rish and Michael how NewDay has transformed their security function to empower digital development and operations. Now there will be time for questions at the end, so please submit these via the question box. And Michael and Rish will answer those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rish Johnson, the CISO here at NewDay. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name's Rich Johnson and I'm the CISO for NewDay. Thank you for joining this webinar on how NewDay is embedding security into digital services and influencing culture. My colleague Michael Meaney will introduce you to how we've transformed security to meet the needs of NewDay as a digital organisation. To help us achieve our strategic goal to be the most innovative digital credit and point-of-sale provider in the UK, we've invested significantly in cloud platforms and technology, as well as our own internal development capability. And that helps us both be agile and flexible when it comes to delivery. Our customer-facing web applications and services are hosted in Azure, and we're also leveraging the AWS cloud platform to deliver our data warehouse and data analytics capability. So to support this transition to cloud platforms, we've had to both enhance and change our security thinking, capabilities and ways of working. This has included investing in our people, aligning security with the data platforms and digital team squads, and changing our security engagement model. So to put it simply, we've had to get close to the business and those teams that are responsible for delivery. So here's Michael Meaney, NewDay's Senior Cloud Security Architect, who will provide the highlights of how we made this change to adapt, shift security so it's a natural part of the development process and the DevOps culture within NewDay. Michael, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rich, and thank you everybody for joining today on Tuesday afternoon. Hopefully it'll be useful and you'll pick up some things which, hopefully some new ideas, etc. So first of all, intro. So NewDay has created what we call a world-class engineering capability. We started building that 3 years ago with the mission of building an award-winning digital credit card platform. And since then, we've managed to achieve that, and it has won awards as well, which is great. So we'll talk through the journey that we've taken on how we've built out our security function to be able to empower our digital teams, to be able to support them in building out that platform. So a little bit about NewDay and about me as well. So interestingly, I've joined NewDay back at the end of May, and this kind of interesting time. I've come in primarily to improve how we do cloud security at NewDay, so it's an interesting challenge. My contact details are just up on the screen. They'll be in the slides after as well for people if they want to reach out and connect afterwards. I won't go through all of the things that I've done in IT or information security. I'll just kind of dive into what we're here to talk about today, and you can kind of look up all of the different 3-letter acronyms I have for everything later. Okay, so about NewDay, in case you haven't heard of us before. So NewDay is a credit card issuer in the UK. We have 2 different types of products. We have products which are the brands that we own and manage ourselves. So we look after the marketing. We own brands which you may have heard of, such as Aqua and Marbles. And we'll basically do the marketing, customer acquisition, and then where people need to sign into the website or the mobile app for each of those credit card products. And then there are other brands that we co-brand with. So you'll recognize a lot of them are kind of high street retails and also online retail as well. So a lot of retailers where when you're in the checkout journey, people will be offered, do you want to sign up for the credit card? You get discount at the time. And then basically the agreement then between the customer is with NewDay then to underwrite the credit risk, and again provide the platform to be able to allow the customer to manage their account and to take payments, etc. And then the difference with NewDay and how we treat our consumers of the different credit cards. So we try and make sure that each of the engagements with our customers is a positive one, and that we're actually helping people to, as you can see, improve their credit score. And we measure that over the course of the year by tracking the credit score of our customers or consumers when they're using the platform. So at the beginning of the year and at various touch points throughout the year. And it's important to us that we measure to make sure that we're having a positive impact. And as we say, driving towards those positive outcomes with people as well. And then to set the scene as well, with respect to security, there's things that NewDay must do. So as a credit card company, we have to be PCI compliant. As a credit card company providing financial services, we're regulated by the FCA. And then also because we provide payment services, we're also in scope for PSD2, and then every other law and regulation within the UK, and GDPR, etc. So empower delivery. So the question, I guess, or the task is for us to be able to help support our digital colleagues to be able to build what we define that mission to be of the world-class leading digital credit card platform. And how we do that is try to enable security in the DevOps culture. So basically, we're working with our digital teams and colleagues to be able to, as I said, do the right thing, and to improve the collaboration between development, engineering, DevOps, and security as well. And then when people are doing the right thing, we reinforce the right behaviors. And more importantly, we drive through, again, positive outcomes so that all of the interactions that our digital team has with us is positive. They will trust the advice that we're giving to them and that they will come back and they will utilize us more and more. Otherwise, it becomes quite a lonely place for us working in security. So it's a combination that we see of people, process, and technology. So we'll step through them in that order as well as the different approaches that we've taken to address each of those. So one of the things we were looking at was the behaviors that we want to see out of the people that work in the security team. So what is the team ethos, not just for ourselves, but for the service providers, partners, and vendors that we work with as well. So when we talk about our manifesto with our customers, so this would be sort of like a manifesto that the security team has for the rest of our colleagues, for the rest of our interactions. And the idea basically is that needs to get to a point where we can allow our colleagues to feel free to come to us, that they have an expectation that they're going to get clear advice, that they are going to have a good interaction with us, they are going to have a positive outcome rather than obviously the perception of a security team either blocking or slowing things down. We very much want to be able to allow the business to be able to take risk as appropriate and as needed to be able to achieve their objectives, to be able to grow the business and to be able to deliver cool new products as well. And then these are actually at a high level, at the organization level, these are the NewDay values. So do the right thing. I mean, in terms of security, it's about taking an appropriate level of risk as well. We can't eliminate it. We can't make it all go away. You've got to take some of it. And we also need to pull together with our colleagues rather than kind of putting all of the problems upon them and say, sorry, you're not compliant or you haven't done X, Y, Z. It's, show them what good security actually looks like. And demonstrate for them that these are the solutions to your problems and work with them to kind of find a common approach. Aspire to extraordinary. Obviously, we've got a very ambitious roadmap of kind of new products and features that we want to put into the credit card platform. Some of those that we've built in recently, such as Apple Pay and Google Pay, that you've got to be able to add those in just to keep pace with all of our competitors. And one of the other ideas as well is that by building a leading platform, rather than just doing just enough to keep pace, doing just enough to stay on trend with the market, we actually want to be able to differentiate into new features and new offerings. And actually some of that can add security benefit to the customers as well. I'm sure everybody's kind of more than familiar now with, over the last couple of years, the ability to freeze your card if you get lost or if you lose it. The ability to block certain types of transactions through your card as well. So all of those features actually improve the security of the product that we're offering to our customers. And then Create Tomorrow, about having a clear vision of what it is that we want to be building and aspire to achieve it. So talking first of all about the colleagues that we need to interact with. So we have, we're arranged into a number of different digital squads. So these are small teams. I mean, it follows loosely the Spotify model. So self-organizing, about 5 to 7, but no more than 10. And each of the squads are aligned to a product or a series of products, or in our case, a collection of microservices. And the way that we need to arrange ourselves within the security team is to be clearly defined what the touch points are. So you'll see some of the interesting names that we've got for the squads internally. But basically the idea is the people within the security engineering team have got squads that they touch base with, that they have daily stand-ups with, that they're keeping a line and looking at what the backlog of work that's coming through is. And some of those is looking at the solutions and the features that are being built into the products that those squads look after. And it's also looking and driving security enhancements, which could or should be added to the backlog, or defects indeed that need picking up and fixing from the backlog as well. And then the other problem that we can have is if we get too many squads and not enough security people, you can end up doing too much plate spinning, where you're spending so much time trying to keep a track of what's going on that it becomes less effective at doing so. So you need to have a plan to figure out, sort of in a metric, measured way, how many security people you need for the number of squads you are to be effective. And it depends on different squads and different products to say how busy they are, how many new things potentially that impact security are being delivered. Some of them obviously are going to carry more risk and are going to be, internet facing or exposed, and they may well need more work versus some things which are just internal facing only. And you will have just trying to figure out basically, does somebody support 2 squads, 3 squads? But once you kind of have that settled, then you have a model that you can try and scale out and add in additional engineers and security resource as needed, because we don't grow on trees, apparently. And then in the method of actually embedding ourselves into all of the digital squads that we have, the idea was that we go and embed ourselves into the existing working practices that they have, rather than turning around and saying, we're security, we sit over here, you have to come to us when you need us to do something. By kind of living and breathing it, the idea is to build that better collaboration with them. And the other thing we're trying to do as well is that traditionally, where security would have been done as a last task before deployment, where you step through your audit and compliance checklist, have you put all the controls in place? Tick, tick, tick. Have you done the pen test? Tick. What defects have you got? Okay, well, is there anybody actually left to fix those, because the project's finished and now everybody's gone and nobody has responsibility for the product anymore. So, I mean, moving from a project-based life cycle to a product-based life cycle, we can take those things and feed them back in, close the feedback loop. So the intention is to do all of the security things all the way through the life cycle as well. So early and frequent engagement, as I said, there's kind of facilitated by people down on the ground working with all of our different squads, and they keep up to date every step of the way throughout the software development lifecycle. And then in terms of pattern of work or kind of rhythm of work, so we have planned work that comes through, which will kind of class as more architecture-y stuff. So that's dealing with annually looking at what the strategy is. So that may be, what is our application security strategy? What is our cloud security strategy at the beginning of the year? And there's going to be a security roadmap of themes and epics, which would get reviewed on a quarterly basis and prioritize and pick out the ones which need to go into our backlog. And then we look at the engineering. So this is in terms of what's been picked out to work on that quarter. We start sitting down and doing the sprint planning with the digital squads to figure out how much effort is assigned to be able to either carry out security enhancements, or also how much effort they need from the security teams to be able to support what it is they're trying to build. And then, as I've alluded to, there are daily stand-ups, which we try and attend as much as we can as well. And then there are bugs and defects. So as we're stepping through the life cycle, we will find security issues and problems. And we need to be able to manage those defects and have a single pane of glass to be able to see them all in the same place, to prioritize them, and to decide which of them we have to fix now before we release, and which of them we have to fix later. So, you know, are they urgent or can it wait? If it can wait, goes into the security backlog, and we put it back into sprint planning to see when it's appropriate or when it's required for those defects to be fixed. And then by doing it that way, we can start to track things in the same metrics that we use for looking at our engineering performance. So we provide visibility of, okay, what's the burn down and how much effort are we putting into fixing security? How quickly are we able to fix security from when a bug is identified or a security defect is identified to when it's being fixed? And we can start to measure, are we getting better at doing security? So one of the theories would be, if we're finding that we're making particular security defects and it's reoccurring, we don't particularly want to have to keep refixing that again and again and again. We'd like to fix it once and make sure it stays fixed and never reoccurs. So it's also useful to start reporting and pulling up metrics on that to kind of figure out, do we have hotspots that need to be addressed more strategically rather than just tactical quick fixes. And then looking at not just the application code, but looking at platform code, or we call it security as code. So looking at the application deployments on the platform. So the approach that we've taken is to break down the application into its constituent parts or patterns. Now, within our platform, our credit card platform, we use serverless architecture. So we've skipped past IaaS, VMs, left that behind. We've skipped past Kubernetes and Docker and containers. We've decided to avoid that and move straight to function-based apps, making heavy use of APIs, making heavy use of single-page applications or Azure App Services. And the idea is we break it down into each of those individual services and review what are the risks and essentially what's the control selection we need to make for each of those services. And then we implement it as infrastructure as code. So we have, in the continuous deployment stage, we have all of these patterns and all of these services already defined as infrastructure as code. And actually, if you look on the market, you know, people will see that there's tools for SAST and DAST, and new category which is springing up is to be able to do infrastructure as code security reviews as well. So, you know, essentially that's what we're doing here manually, and we'll be looking at how to actually automate that in the future, so that it can actually detect, is what we're deploying already secured, or are there, you know, defects we need to fix in that as well. And the idea as well that just because you've done an infrastructure as code review today doesn't necessarily mean it will still be secure or the right controls will be selected in 6 months' time. So we've just had Ignite 2020 a couple of weeks ago. I know the Amazon reInvent is going to be coming up in a few weeks as well. I think it's a 3-week virtual conference this year. So generally, like after those two main big events, you'll see like a slew of new features, new controls, etc. will come out. And at that point, then probably in January or February, it's a good chance for us to look at the problems which will come out of the woodwork of people, first learnings, early adopters, and then decide, okay, well, what can we use? What should we use? And try to implement as much of that as possible as quickly as we can. So this one can be busy, but I've broken it down to talk through it. So if we take the stages of planning, developing, building, deploy, monitor, or basically a CI/CD pipeline, and also once it's gone live. So we've always kind of done the traditional stuff. So you scan the platform, you monitor it for vulnerabilities. I mean, we have to, as a PCI compliant organization, we need to do quarterly scans, and we use a scanning vendor for that. We have various different pen testing and red teaming requirements, and we've got your traditional detection response, SIEM, etc. And we've also added in crowdsourced testing as well, where we have essentially it's like private bug bounties, so to provide that continual assurance of the platform. And then we've got your more traditional penetration testing. As I said, it's normally the thing that happens right before you deploy. But then how much time do you have to fix all of the defects which are identified out of a pen test? Because I don't know about other people's experience, but I've never really seen enough time to fix that stuff. So the idea is, and you'll hear people talk about shift left, and this is why I'm working from right to left on this slide, talking about the different tools that we're using. We'll scan the application in system test and UAT once it's been deployed, pick up the defects from that, put it back into the backlog for it to be fixed. And then when it's still being developed and when we're building the code, run our SAS tools for scanning our source code, have people do manual code review, checking within Visual Studio, is it actually built according to the secure coding standards and policy we've defined. Talk there about infrastructure as code review as well, and then also software composition analysis. So looking at open source components that people may have picked up off of GitHub, other projects. If I'm using jQuery and there is a big new 0-day or crucial vulnerability that comes out for it, I'd kind of like to know where I'm running it and what version I'm running, and to be able to provide assurance that I've fixed it. And then at the beginning, in the planning stage, to start to understand in terms of the business context of the application, what is the information, what's the risk, and then what are the security test cases that we need to. So when we've defined what the risk is, we define, okay, these are the controls we need. If these are the controls we need, then we need to have a test for each one to make sure it's working, right? And also to make sure we're not taking a cookie cutter approach to testing and writing tests for things which were never actually built in as controls, because if you're testing controls that don't exist, obviously they're going to fail. And then also there's security user stories as well, so that we can actually put it and package it up in a way so that our development and engineering teams have got actual security tasks that they can work on. And then to close the loop so that we take things out of that, put it into the defect backlog. And I spoke earlier before, like if we were able to pick up patterns for things that we're particularly weak at. So again, just if there's a particular part of the OWASP top 10, we'll just take out random input validation. If we find that we're continually finding defects and they're all input validation defects, well, that would kind of suggest to me that maybe we need to run a campaign or a training module specifically on input validation. And then throughout the year, call it whack-a-mole, but a little bit more targeted than that. We look at each month, what is the top security defect that we're seeing in terms of category. And then on the back of that month, we run a module to go, okay, right, so this month we're having a problem with crypto. Let's go back and retrain on that. Next month, we might be having a problem on cross-site scripting. Go back and have a education sessions on that as well. It's always to have a problem of the month that we need to be addressing and making better. On technology, so our approach to security on cloud really is to leverage the investment that the cloud service providers have been making over the last couple of years. So Microsoft, for example, have invested, it was over $1 billion in the Azure security last year for 2019. And to be honest, that, like for those of you that have been working with it for a while, if you go back to 2016, 2017 and compare it to now, it's come on leaps and bounds. And it also means that you can look at what's coming down the road, what's coming next. You know, there are always features that we're asking, okay, when are we going to have this thing? But also we have a high degree of confidence that in 2 to 3 years time, again, it's going to be coming on leaps and bounds again. So we take an approach that if there's a control which is native to the platform, to make use of that rather than necessarily going out for third-party tools to fill the gap. Because one, how tightly integrated can you make that? And two, like how long will it be before Microsoft actually closes the gap, or Amazon, AWS when they close the gap as well? The other thing was it's important to us that we use a managed service provider who gets or understands the cloud, and they help us with managed detection and response. And it's important that when you're investigating security incidents, when you need the context of the platform, you know, if you're working with a service provider who doesn't really understand what they're looking at in terms of cloud, that can be problematic. And then particularly for us when we're deciding that, okay, we're deploying it as a serverless architecture, we need to work with a service provider who understands what it is we're working with. And that's been working quite well for us. We've had that relationship now for over a year. It's been spun up and going pretty good. Next one is building an ecosystem of solutions that play nicely with each other. I kind of have been at several places that I've worked at, several organizations in my past, where we have a different solution from a different vendor for everything. It's almost like collect the vendor bingo. And actually our preference is to try and minimize the number of vendors, minimize the number of solutions that we have. It kind of speaks to the first point here, which is use the native controls in the platform. And actually we can speak to, on the other side, as an Office 365 E5 customer, if there's something we're licensed for out of that, test it, use it. If it's good enough and secure enough, great. Because to be honest, to put in something third party just because it's best of breed, Gartner Magic Quadrant, top right hand corner, it can be diminishing returns after a while. And there will probably be a new leading vendor next year, the year after, and you can't keep changing all the time. Well, you can try. And then the other one is beware about throwing solutions at problems without defining what is the problem in the first place. So where you get glamorized, or you see shiny new toys and have a conversation with a new vendor and they've got you all excited about it, to be able to actually take a step back and go, okay, well, what is the product? Sorry, not product, but what is the problem we're actually trying to solve here? And understand, if I need something new, do I need something new? Is there a process that I can fix? Is there people that I need to hire to be able to run this properly? Too often kind of get caught in the trap of deploying a big new shiny thing, and then the objective of the project is to get it deployed. And then it's also about measuring what good looks like at the end of the project. Once you've deployed something, is it working? Is it effective? Are you getting value from it? I'm sure we've all got examples of products that we've either purchased and weren't working quite well, or we purchased and they were never really fully implemented because the onboarding step was missed. So what we do try and do is make sure that if we've defined what the success for the project looks like, which for us is good security, and for us it's risk reduction, that we've actually got the outcome of risk reduction at the end of the project, and we can measure that and we can ensure that, because then it means when we come in and get audited, we can hold it up and go, hey, look, we've done it. Last one is we're going to talk about some common cloud security mistakes and what we see as the top priorities or the top things to close off to address those. So first one is securing the subscription. So if you look at what we used to build in the data center, if you would deploy a new firewall, you wouldn't exactly give too many people access to the management console or the management pane of glass for that firewall. And a lot of organizations, again, I'm not talking about any particular organization, but I will say what we've done to fix it. But a lot of organizations are too open in terms of permissions that they've given, particularly to the Azure Management Console. So what you can do in the portal, the recommendation from Microsoft is not to have any more than 5 global admins in the Azure AD tenant. But when you look at the figures, Microsoft say actually there's not a lot of organizations that actually follow that recommendation. So there's some core basics to follow and some tools which, again, out of the box, cloud native. So deploying Azure Privileged Identity Management, which we've done, it works quite well. Azure Identity Protection, something you can turn on to protect your Azure identities. I also like as well how all the Microsoft tools just basically say what they do rather than any other marketing name. And then turning on conditional access and making contextual aware decisions on administrator login. So, if an administrator wants to log in and do something on Azure, they assign themselves a role, then you provide a justification, they might get prompted to step up, re-enter their MFA credentials to be able to assume that role and carry out their work. Basically kind of moving away from the CyberArk jump host model into, as we said, a more cloud native way. Next one is around cyber hygiene and secure defaults. The idea is we want to minimize the attack surface, configuration mistakes in the platform. We do that by working through, there's a good resource from Microsoft called the Azure Security Compass. There's also good recommendations on the AWS platform from the well-architected framework. They have a security pillar. And then it's also using the built-in security tools such as Security Center in Azure and using Security Hub within AWS, working through the recommendations and stepping through them one by one. And good thing about them is that the recommendations, they are weighted by the things which will have the biggest impact to your risk reduction. So it's generally a good idea to go after the big ticket items. Obviously do the things which are low effort and can go in with little to no change, but it's a good roadmap of improvements to make, and until you've done it, there's kind of not much point doing much else really. Obviously do all the things, but probably do those ones first. The other one is building cloud applications. We don't want to build data centers in the cloud, and we do that to unlock cloud benefits. So to be able to pay as you use, utility based, be able to scale out performance. And I think where we were a couple of years ago, again, going back to 2016, 2017, there were gaps in the native controls on the platforms. I do remember that network security groups, you couldn't really get a firewall log out of them. You could look at what traffic was denied, you couldn't look at what traffic was allowed, and they improved that, I think, at some point during the middle of 2017, or was it beginning of, midway through 2017, or maybe even beginning of 2018. But basically you get better telemetry out of all of the different network level controls on the platform. But until then, people were very much deploying network virtual appliances. And the problems with those is that you need to pay either upfront for the license to your traditional vendors, which we know who they are. And you could deploy that, but then if you ran out of performance, because you buy these as physical appliances in the data center, if you run out of performance on a virtual appliance, okay, fine, you can kind of turn it down and spin it up, or you can add in another cluster. But then by the time you start adding in additional nodes, you start looking at, okay, synchronizing routes and sessions across them, and actually splitting out into different clusters, and some of your traffic has a user-defined route going down that way, some of it down that way. And the benefits of using the built-in controls these days is that they've come a long way. They've filled a lot of the deficiencies they used to have, and they actually scale out quite well because they're built into the silicon within the actual cloud hosts. So FPGA chips, they've all got network instructions running on them, scale a lot better than anything that you will ever run as a virtual appliance as x86 on a server. Next one is to patch everything. So, I mean, for us, it's less of an overhead and a burden because we are running a serverless architecture. So most of our patching is within our application code, so open source code, and also the patching the vulnerabilities that we have. And the purpose obviously is to, again, minimize attack surface, reduce the number of vulnerabilities. We can do that by maintaining proper asset management and understanding that when a vulnerability comes out, where are we exposed? And we test all throughout the CI/CD lifecycle so that we minimize the attack window, the amount of time that we're vulnerable for. And also, I think the whole point is that if we get it right and we get the empowerment of our digital teams correct, and we enable them to be able to push out releases more quickly. So I think if you go back a while, we were pushing out once a month, then we're pushing out once every 2 weeks. And now we're nearly at the point where we're pushing out weekly, or I think we already are there. And the ambition is to get faster and faster in our code velocity. So if we get to a point where we're pushing out every day, if we have security vulnerabilities that we've identified yesterday, and we're pushing out the fix for them tomorrow or today, and we're talking about having a day or two of turnaround time in between patching and remediating these vulnerabilities, basically that's a big security win that we've taken from that. So kind of by enabling the machine to go so fast, actually security stuff can get improved at the same pace, which I think is really cool. And just wanted to throw in something to embarrass one of the team here. So recent feedback where we talked about the ethos or the behaviors that we wanted to show. So one of the feedback from somebody in our platforms, data platforms team recently, so that engagement with one of our security architects. He was very pragmatic and he's showing all of the behaviors that we want to exhibit. But the outcome for us on that is that, you know, we've got a happy colleague, we've got a colleague who's going to be open to engaging with us in future, and he's going to want to keep coming back to us, and he trusts our advice, and he's obviously satisfied with the working relationship. And to be honest, I want that not just with that one colleague or the team that he's working in, but I want that with all of our digital teams and teams in our data platform team as well. Just thought as well I'd throw in a bunch of resources to review. So at the top, a list of websites that I check out. I mean, to be honest, National Cybersecurity Centre, this is just one particular article on their website, but obviously they've got a whole host of stuff on there. Mark Simos is the lead Microsoft cybersecurity architect. His GitHub page has, or his GitHub repositories have quite a lot of resources in there, including the Azure Security Compass, top 10 Azure security recommendations, is well worth checking out. Microsoft have got the Azure Secure DevOps Kit. Obviously, it depends what you're using in terms of your deployment infrastructure and how heavily you're using Azure DevOps in the first place, but you can certainly take elements from it and use it if you are deploying stuff to Azure. On the AWS side, again, there's the security pillar, well-architected framework. I won't say search engines, but actually there's quite a lot of good articles on Medium. I know you have to subscribe to the service, but if you do, I just did as an experiment a quick search for cloud security on Medium. It pulled up a lot of cool, interesting stuff. I do quite often see articles which are very interesting and make me think in different ways on there. There are security blogs, obviously, for AWS, from Microsoft. One of the other interesting ones as well, actually, is managesentinel.com. And they have some very good resources demonstrating the difference between the data center version of a control, the AWS version of a control, the Google version of a control, the Microsoft version of a control, and basically mapping what all of the different products names are. So, for example, in AWS, you've got S3, you've got KMS. Well, you go to Microsoft and you've got an object store with Key Vault. You know, in AWS, it will say you're using security groups. In Microsoft, you're using network security groups. You know, essentially they are the same products with the same functionality, but it's got that mapping and then also the comparison to the, you know, go tell your infrastructure guys in the data center, this is the new version of what it is that we're using in the cloud. And then in terms of podcasts, so some of these are pretty good as well. And the Azure Security Podcast, sometimes it'll be Mark Simos, Alex Feinart, who, you know, they'll be talking about new topics such as zero trust, etc. So some of them are good to listen to. I'll listen to, I would say, when I'm on the train into work, except that's very rarely at the moment. So sometimes I'll listen to it on the weekend. And then last slide, last but not least, is to come and work with us. So we do actually have an opening right now for a cloud security engineer who specializes in Azure to come work with us in London. So our digital team who develop and deploy all of the stuff on Azure, they are based in London. We have an office here in King's Cross, which I'm in today, lots of brickwork. And the main kind of 4 things I've tried to distill it down to is that this will be securing serverless architectures on Azure. It'll be articulating risk in clear terms down to an individual component level, i.e. if we don't enable that control, what's the impact? And if we do enable it, what's the impact? And try and explain and come to sensible decisions. The other one is to define, well, what is our risk posture on everything on Azure? And to manage what the roadmap is of all of the improvements that we need to improve security on Azure. And then the last thing is to closely match the values and ethos that we have. So for somebody to closely work with our digital teams and colleagues and to ensure that they have a positive outcome and that they're working well with security to improve security on the platform, but also to empower and enable the development and deployment and improvements to our world-class industry-leading digital credit card platform. And you'll see at the bottom there, the URL, that is the current job posting on LinkedIn as well. So, sorry, I whizzed through that. But now we get to the section of Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you both. That was so insightful. So we are now going to take questions from the audience. So if anyone does have any questions, please just fire them over the chat box. And if you've got a particular panelist that you would like to direct it to, please just let me know when you submit your question. But the first one is, pandemic aside, what has been the biggest obstacle to improving security at NewDay?
I wouldn't say obstacle, really, because we have the support for security from the top down. I'd rather say challenge, because both the security function and the teams that we often rely on as well to help us configure and deploy security have a lot of competing priorities. So it's being able to fit the security requirements into that. And that's why it's important that we integrate security into the development and delivery processes and enable that shift left that Michael has been talking about in this presentation.
Fantastic. Michael, do you have anything to add, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, resources. So as I said, like, security people don't grow on trees, and it can be like trying to hunt for magical mystical unicorns at times. So kind of finding that right blend of skills, you know, we found very difficult. There's not enough good people out there, and there definitely is a shortage. It's been exacerbated by the situation at the moment. So where we've been searching for people, a lot of people are understandably, I think, kind of hunkered down, not necessarily looking to make a move. But obviously we're still going strong, still hiring. So yeah, it's just having enough people to satisfy the demand within the business. So, because otherwise you end up in that challenge where I laid out, you've got, you know, all of these teams that we need to support. And you can try and do it to the best of your ability, but until you get to that full complement and have enough people to do it properly, obviously the experience is going to be impacted.
Fantastic. So moving on to the next question, what has been the biggest improvement or step change within cloud security that has got you excited?
I'll go first. I think for me, it's the level of visibility that cloud service providers have, and I'm more knowledgeable on the Azure side. So if you take Microsoft, for example, they look across their corporate customers, Azure platform customers, Office 365 customers, across the estate that their personal individual users use as well. So Xbox and Outlook email accounts, etc. And I think Microsoft is the second most attacked organization globally after the US Department of Defense. So they have quite immense visibility of threats and evolving and new cyber attack activity. And we're able to leverage that intelligence and capabilities that we apply to protect the services that we are hosting and delivering on the Azure platform, and also our colleagues as well, because we leverage a number of Azure technologies to protect the wider network and our business functions too. I think the second thing is the pace of development. Michael mentioned the investment that Microsoft are making into security on an annual basis. And certainly both AWS and Azure are enabling all sorts of different security services and capabilities. And we review those as they become available to see what we want to adopt and, you know, what fits into our strategy and where we might have some improvements that we want to make as well. So for me, that's the biggest thing, the level of visibility they have that we can leverage, and the services that they are providing that enable us to implement good security.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rich. Michael, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, so it's kind of like pretty much the same thing, really. I mean, it is the sheer number of features which are being deployed, and you know, we frequently talk to Microsoft and look at what's coming down the horizon, or you know, we all have a wish list of things that we're like, when are we going to have something like this? And they'll go, well, funny you should say that, because we're sort of working on it at the moment. Would you like to preview it? And we'll be like, Yeah, yes, please. And I think that certainly from a security point of view, it's a lot better than what it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, it just kind of seemed to be that you would put a question up on the Azure user voice, it would get voted up. It'll be triaged, and somebody from Microsoft would reply to it and say, yes, yes, good idea. You'd come back to it a year later, still no further progress. So yeah, I think the actual discussions are a lot more encouraging, that, you know, when there is a feature in the roadmap, depending on the size of your organization, obviously Microsoft can share more with larger, more strategic organizations, but we get a good view of what the roadmap is. That kind of whets the appetite for all the new stuff coming, and actually the sheer number of things which get released that you can just simply turn on out of the box. It's like kind of drinking from the fire hydrant or drinking from the hose pipe at the moment. There's so much coming through that would be great to turn on. It's almost like we don't have enough people to go through and do so much of it. So, but yeah, like some of the features that are coming through are pretty cool, and just want to use all of them as quickly as possible.
Fantastic, thank you, Michael. Just to remind everyone to submit their questions over via the chat box, which everyone is doing. Talking about people, how can we make security attractive to non-technical colleagues?
Yeah, technical colleagues.
Non-technical.
Absolutely have that. Oh, yes, sorry, it was my introduction, but it's much broader than that. It's really about understanding the organization. Information security or cybersecurity applies to the organization as a whole. And I think that's important to emphasize. It's not just about the tech piece. It's about good risk management as well. So if people are interested in that space, because essentially security is about managing risk to the business, enabling the business to achieve its objectives. I think also there are multiple roles within security, some that are less technical than others. So if we take security awareness, for example, that can leverage different people's skill sets. There's policy development, assurance activity, the understanding and assessment of supplier security risk. And that doesn't always need a technical bent. So it's selling that how important it is and how integral security is to a business and the different opportunities that are available.
Fantastic. And Michael, do you have anything to add, or we've got a next question that's coming?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it kind of comes, is it from trying to make people make the move into security as like are they interested in working or having a career in security? Let's kind of leave aside the government's recent advert that got widely shared earlier in the week. But yeah, if you're talking about like just trying to make it so that your colleagues pay attention and are engaged on the topic when we're having discussions with them, it's kind of like trying to leave technical language aside. So I think about it as in, how would I discuss it with my mum? So it coming up with a real world construct. So the way that I explain it normally to friends and family outside of work is I always put it in terms of, well, I've got a house, right? And I've got a door and I've got a lock and I've got cameras and I've got, you know, but you know, if I was storing if I was storing like really expensive diamonds and stuff and I had it in a safe, do I want it in a safe? Should I put it in a, you know, a vault? Or, you know, if I am going to store it at home, am I going to hire security guards, dogs, etc.? Well, if I'm, you know, making £10 million a year, then maybe I might have more to protect. But I start explaining it to people in those terms. So just kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily say dumb down, but, you know, we can leave the technical things aside and just abstract the conversation, try and come up with analogies, real world examples, just make it more relatable for the people that we're discussing it with. So yeah, I mean, it kind of sum it up, just make it as relatable as possible, and then people might be a little bit more interested.
Very real world advice there. So we've got a question come in. Are the regulators keeping up with the technology, or are you prevented from putting some workloads on, say, for example, serverless until they update their standards? Let me know if you want me to repeat that.
No, we're not prevented. So the interesting thing with the regulator is that they will not dictate what you should be doing, or they're not as prescriptive as saying that you must, follow this standard and that standard and that standard. The way, and I think personally that I've always approached it, is that if you got hauled in front of the regulator to explain yourself, do you have a story which is defendable, or do you have an architecture, or do you have a plan which is defendable to them? And can you demonstrate that you've appropriately assessed the risk and you've made decisions, the correct decisions, with the appropriate level of due diligence and respect to the risks involved? Particularly with a regulator, I mean, FCA, they've had lots of turnover of people recently, and they have the same challenges that the rest of us have in security. They have to hire the same people, and they in my dealings with them, I haven't necessarily been held back by them, but sometimes you do need to kind of take them and walk them through the approach, and be a little bit more transparent with them. And who knew that people would, private banks who would pay loads and loads of money for the same resources are going to poach people from regulators as well. So yeah, I mean, they have the same resource problems that we have. But for me, it comes down to having a defendable security architecture that you can hang your hat on and kind of go in there and talk with confidence that, you're doing the right thing. And if somebody doesn't understand that, then, have a discussion, negotiation, and bring them along the journey with you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the regulator will set guidance, principles, standards, and it's up to us to demonstrate how we are implementing those across our different technology environments with, and I think we can provide, as well as being able to explain that, we can provide assurance through the visibility that we have and the testing that we do as well, to demonstrate that those configurations are secure. I know the FCA understands and often references the NIST cybersecurity framework. So we anchor a number of the different control activities that we do in that framework as well, which helps explain how we're covering the kind of standard security control domains.
Okay, perfect. We've got a couple of questions in. Just to say, please do fire your questions away. I've got someone here apologising if it was answered in the presentation. Please just fire away if you're not sure about anything, or have any questions, whether you missed it or not. That's exactly why we've got the panellists on the call today. So, first of all, is your penetration testing conducted mainly in-house or by a third-party vendor? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each?
I'll take that one. So we work with a number of different external parties to conduct security testing. And we do have some skills internally, but we'll look to leverage the skills and capabilities of the partners we work with. And the primary reason for that is they kind of maintain their skill set and knowledge about evolving and current techniques and the tool sets that are available and how they are and have been developed, and how they can identify and exploit particular vulnerabilities as well. So we will always look to leverage the skills of our third-party providers.
Fantastic. Michael, do you have anything to add, or I've got a backup question to this?
Yeah, I can quickly add. So, I mean, basically the thing you're weighing up quite often with it is if you go to an external party, it will be a point-in-time snapshot. Normally it's a project-led engagement, fixed time, and it will be, I suppose, comparatively more expensive to hire that resource. If you do it in-house, you're doing it with people who not quite as independent. So can you get that independent level of assurance? And if what you're doing is to provide assurance to an audit or compliance function, that's also a very good reason for going outside. If you're doing it internally, it gives you an opportunity to build up context of the application, allows you to do it continuously, so you're not doing it at a point in time. One of the approaches that we have taken is to look at crowdsourced security testing. So it is continuous testing, out of the people who are being crowdsourced to test it, some of them will come back repeatedly, and they will actually build up a picture of your environment over time. So they're not starting from scratch every time. They'll start to get a feeling for where your various different holes or weaknesses or finding patterns, etc. And they will start to come up with an idea of a threat model for the application as well. So it's kind of like you get the independent assurance side, but you also get the continuous engagement side of it as well. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. So yeah, it's kind of like there are pros and cons of doing it both ways. Some of the reasons we have to go outside because, you know, regulation, compliance, but to cover off the advantages you get from doing it internally, and that's why we've gone for that crowdsourcing service approach as well.
Yeah, and I think with the crowdsource model as well, we're able to leverage, as I said, some people who have specific security testing skill sets. They might just focus on APIs, for example, and they've got a real high level of expertise in testing that particular technology or component. So we want to take advantage of that. And with the external testers we know the testers that they use for testing our services have already been through a level of like a capabilities assessment, and they have to meet a very high bar before they start testing our services.
Fantastic. We've just got a couple of minutes left, so we'll just take some final questions. What was the biggest challenge you faced when trying to embed security testing earlier in the development process?
And to be honest, it's still a challenge that we have. So it's like the biggest challenge, full stop, is trying to make the findings relevant. And I think actually that comes down to, so one of the things that we're currently trying to address is how we present the findings to people. So rather than just kind of pulling out findings and going, okay, you've got a ticket of another finding that needs to be fixed, because it comes down to almost opinion sometimes as well as to whether or not that is urgent enough to be fixed, or is it something that is by design in the platform or not. Give you an example, if you're doing input validation, well, from all untrusted sources, you should be validating your inputs. But if it's internal to an application and it's internal to our environment, do we need to be validating input from one internal function app to another internal function app? The idea is no, because it's within the boundary of trust. You know, it's not an untrusted input, it's a trusted input. You know, the untrusted input has already been validated and sanitized. So in that respect, in this particular application design, by design, it didn't have like a third or fourth layer of input validation. Yet with the testing, the testing was testing for it there. But it was looking to see, are you doing input validation? So the testing that we were doing wasn't targeted to what the tools were looking for, or basically targeted based on what the business context or what the design of the application was. So it's one of the cases where we said we need to refine the security test cases that we have. You know, there's no point testing for controls which don't exist and then flagging up, you know, that the sky is falling on our heads, and then find out actually, well, it's not a problem because it's like that by design. And we already have other mitigations in place to address that risk. What you actually need to do is go through and define, well, what are the controls that you have, and write tests for them. And if you take the kind of generic approach to go, I'm just going to run a scanner and I'm going to run it against the OWASP top 10, well, then there are things that you miss. So for example, where you're going through your application design, one of the common ones is when you run through the permissions, you go, okay, right, so everybody's got an admin or a super user, they've got permission to do everything, or most everything. Then you got maybe, I don't know, a line manager, they've got permission to do some things more than others. And then you got somebody who's like the right at the bottom in terms of permission. So in between one release to the next, who's checking to make sure that that person with the lowest number of permission hasn't accidentally been given more privilege than they need to be done? So we picked that up, and we're redoing our functional testing to actually be going through and checking the permissions to make sure we've not had a permissions creep or, you know, an accidental escalation of privilege throughout, the application design through future release. And that's an example of, if we were to just take a generic approach to testing, wouldn't have picked that up. So it's to make your testing actually relevant. And as I said, where you have a control, test for it, because where you've got a control, you've got an expected output. And whether that's a restrictive control, which should be blocking something, or it's something which should be allowed, but just check it's working okay. And then also, there's no point testing for controls which don't exist, and they don't exist because they're not supposed to exist.
Thank you, Michael. We've unfortunately run out of time, but Michael, do you just want to give a very, very quick overview of sort of your insights or trends or any advice to anyone in the call within your profession, just to close?
Go for it, Michael, and I will finish off.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave it the well, for me, the hiring one is kind of the most important thing I want to end on. That hopefully I've given an impression of what it is that we like to, how we want the security team to work within NewDay, kind of what it's like to work in NewDay, and that if anybody has any questions about NewDay, about cybersecurity in general, and feel free to reach out. Be too happy to field questions that maybe perhaps we didn't get around to on this session.
Yeah, I think similar. I think, friends, I'd really say the threats that we face are constantly evolving. Some of them are the same kind of threat types, but they are evolving in their nature, and it is about being conscious of what those changes are, what they mean to us as an organization, and then how we need to respond to that. And I think it's really important for us as security professionals to understand that and understand the risk, and then how we're actually addressing those risks as well with the technologies and the capabilities that we have. I think it's good as well within a security function to have people who've got all sorts of different experiences. And you mentioned about people who might not be technical, but it is within a broad ranging security function. You need to bring people in who've got different perspectives and different skill sets, because we really want to be able to leverage those to help meet some of the challenges that we have. And I think similar to what Michael said, I don't think my details are in this presentation, but I can be contacted on LinkedIn, so please reach out to me, and I'm happy to have conversations with people as well about security.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for today. It really was an insightful session. And just to let everyone know on the call that the session was recorded, so we'll be shortly sending out, probably tomorrow morning, the recording, and then just any of the references that Michael included in the presentation, I'll also put in there. Hopefully they're helpful. And of course, the link to the job role that's still being advertised. Just please reference that you joined this webinar, and I'm sure the NewDay team would be very, very happy to speak with you. Have a lovely evening, and thank you again, both Rish and Michael. All right then, goodbye.
Thank you,
Brilliant,
Aria.
thank you. Yeah, cheers, thanks.
Thank you. Bye.